the most generous description of the Trump presidency in 1.0 or 2.0, if you're looking for positive ways of how he's tried to, try to move the country in a direction that maybe there's a majority wanting to move in that direction. But it's his inability to sort of, when he's onto something that has majority support, he doesn't seem to know how to implement it. My longtime colleague and friend, Sahil Kapoor, who was over at NBC News, had a terrific piece about Donald Trump, responding to this executive order he signed this week before he left for his Middle East trip on prescription drugs. And let me read part of what he said. He says, there's been a unique tendency for Trump in his second term, a reluctance to attempt bipartisanship, even when there is significant overlap with Democrats on a goal. Instead, Trump has repeatedly sought to go it alone, at risk of failure. The self-styled deal maker is passing up opportunities for a deal, lest he have to share the victory with his political foes, Kapoor writes. It is a break from tradition. He notes, presidents typically do attempt to achieve congressional approval for their goals, knowing that legislation is the best way for a policy to overcome legal hurdles, especially if it's bipartisan, because it can stand the test of time. And he notes this move on drug pricing is just the latest example. In recent weeks, he notes, Trump has hinted at support for raising taxes on upper earners, a goal that has virtually unanimous Democratic support. He could have turned that into a bipartisan victory, but instead, he's repeatedly offered it up as a trial balloon for his party line agenda, only for congressional Republicans to shoot it down. He notes another example, Trump's campaign promise of government-funded IVF treatments, another goal that Democrats are more supportive of than Republicans. And guess what? It is not in anywhere in his big, beautiful bill. And yet there has been, as he writes, scant effort by Trump at a bipartisan deal that could deliver on that promise. And then he notes, the tendency in general is why Trump has signed fewer bills into law than any president since the 1950s during his first 100 days in office. And this is, look, I could sit here and say this is a Trump problem, but this has been something that's developed arguably really since Bill Clinton's presidency, and really, so then some might argue since Newt Gingrich took over and Newt Gingrich's philosophy took over the Republican Party, where you had a Republican Party that wouldn't want to work with a Democratic president. And the more that happened with Bill Clinton, the fewer Democrats that would be willing to work with a Republican president. It became this tit for tat. Ronald Reagan enjoyed a lot of Democratic support in the early 80s for his early stuff. I remember getting lots of stories by the late Ken Duberstein, former chief of staff, in the last 2 years of Ronald Reagan. In the first term, Duberstein worked in the Congressional Liaison Office, and they had a mandate to work with Democrats and to find ways to come up with legislation that they could work with House Democrats. And they had a lot of bipartisan success. It was the way you got things done. Now, granted, Ronald Reagan had to work with Democrats because Democrats had control of the House during his entire presidency. So certainly having, and Bill Clinton had to work with House Republicans in much of his second term. Why? Because for much of his presidency, they controlled the House. George W. Bush didn't have to really work with Democrats till the end, and they weren't ready to work with him. And Barack Obama had most of his legislative success came in the first 2 years when he had full control, Democratic control of Congress. And we saw the same thing with Donald Trump. So the point is that this has been a growing trend of less and less bipartisanship, which really means is why there's a feeling that it feels like Congress doesn't really get stuff done because everything is being done on a party line vote. So let's go back to the prescription drug idea. I mean, here he wants to create most favored nation policy in order to essentially get prescription drug prices down in America, balance them out with, many pharmaceutical companies sell these prescription drugs for a lower cost overseas than they do to Americans here. Now, his executive order is meaningless. It is just a press release signed by his name. It'll get tossed out by the courts. It has no chance of becoming law. And how do we know this? Even the pharmaceutical companies know this. Like the minute the EO went out, stocks went down, and then they realized, it has no teeth. And then the pharmaceutical stocks went right up. So if he actually wanted to do this, By the way, there were plenty of Republicans who weren't interested in doing this with him, but he could have had a bipartisan victory. But he's chosen not to go down that road. He chose not to go down that road on taxes. He chose not. Now, there's a, there would be those at the Trump White House that would say, well, there's a reason he has to do it this way. It's called reconciliation. That's the only way. He can't get over a filibuster. So if he wants to avoid Democrats having the power of the filibuster to thwart Trump's agenda, they have to do this under specific requirements on a party line vote. And look, I'm not going to bother to go through the minutia that is reconciliation. All I will tell you is that this, when it goes to, my frustration at our cult of personality presidencies is mostly the result of an ineffective Congress and a broken Senate. And this ridiculous reconciliation process, this ridiculous set of filibuster rules that sort of work and sort of don't, where you don't really filibuster, you don't really have a way to sort of to use it in a way that might actually make it look like Mr. Smith going to Washington. You could have, I think we could have a more functional government, a more functional legislative branch. And yeah, we would have more bipartisan bills. And I know that in these days, if the other party has the White House, the party out of power doesn't want to work with that because the president's going to get all the credit. This should be the incentive for Trump to get caught trying bipartisanship. Barack Obama didn't like doing it. He wasn't great at it. He tried it a little bit on healthcare. And then the minute Grassley and Voinovich walked away, he walked away from bipartisanship. He wasn't alone. I'm not going to sit here and just, Bill Clinton tried hard at first with bipartisanship. It didn't really go anywhere. George W. Bush had some success on his tax cuts. He got 5 Democrats, if I'm not mistaken, to sign on to Bush tax cuts back in 2002. So, and he worked at that hard. Obviously, the atmosphere after 9/11 made things a bit more collegial, at least for a short period of time, and he took advantage of that a bit. But it is odd. There are times that what Trump wants to do align with a chunk of Democrats who would like to pursue the same policy. And instead of an attempt to be Mr. Art of the Deal, he instead sort of floats it at it. Look, I think it serves him well politically, right? Because many in his political base are not small government conservatives. They want to hear that he is, in theory, for some of these things. So he's able to come out and sound like a populist, sound like, hey, yeah, I'm willing to raise taxes on rich people. Yeah, I want to lower prescription drug costs, but I'm not going to do the work to actually make that happen. If he wanted to make that happen, there's a majority of voters that would raise taxes, majority of members of Congress that would agree to raise taxes. He could get a tax break essentially for young parents. They wanted to increase the size of the child care tax credit, get bipartisan support for it, and have it paid for by raising tax rates on individuals that make over $2 million. You could probably get Democratic support for eliminating many taxes on people earning less than $100,000 a year in exchange for raising rates on those that make $1 million plus or more. I mean, the irony is that there are these bipartisan deals to be had if he really wanted to do this prescription drug. So it is a question of does he even want to do these accomplishments? Does he just want some credit that he's for them? And he can say, well, Democrats don't want to work with me. Look, I've said this. I used to say this during the Obama administration, and Obama's folks would get mad at me. I say, you know what? This isn't a 50-50 arrangement between president and Congress. Presidents have to go 80% of the way. Congress will never go more than 20% towards a president, right? Because they're so fearful of their own politics, their own place, all of those things. So presidents almost have to go further in order to achieve, a small incremental piece of bipartisanship. But this president passes it up, doesn't try, sort of will, throw up a tweet or a Truth Social post here and there. He'll get some credit. He'll have some Democrats going, yeah, we would talk to him. And then it never happens. So it's a fascinating aspect to watch of him. And look, the fact of the matter is his presidency is going to disappear into thin air if he doesn't get bipartisan achievements. If all of his achievements are via executive order and reconciliation bills that basically expire after 10 years, then it really means his presidency and all the impact could be erased in a decade or less. If you want real achievement, you got to get bipartisan action done and signed into law. That's how you get real achievements.